I was splitting wood when I saw them. The afternoon was the particular gray of a gray hollow winter flat, heavy, the kind of sky that had been promising more snow for 2 days and was getting around to delivering it. My breath came out in clouds. The axe was good, and the wood was dry, and I had been at it long enough that I had stopped thinking about anything except the next log. Then I looked up. 3 figures on the mountain road, coming down through the trees. Small figures, moving slowly, the kind of slow that had nothing to do with leisure. I put down the axe. They were maybe 200 meters out when I started toward them, close enough to see the details. School coats, not winter coats. Shoes with no grip on packed snow. The smallest one, a girl very young, her braids escaping from under a knit hat, was on the back of the eldest, arms around his neck, legs hanging loose. He was carrying her without acknowledging that he was carrying her, the way children carry things that have become so necessary they stop noticing the weight. The middle one was walking with his eyes forward and his jaw set and his arms clamped to his sides, which was how you walked when you had stopped feeling your hands and were not going to say so. I reached them at the gate. The eldest looked at me with dark eyes that took in my face, my cabin behind me, the smoke from the chimney, the woodpile, all of it in the fast, systematic way of someone assessing a situation. He was 10, maybe. His face had the specific look of a child who had been the responsible adult for longer than a child should be and was at the precise limit of what that cost. "I'm looking for help," he said. His voice was steady. He had prepared this sentence. "You found it," I said. "Come inside." I did not ask what had happened. I did not ask who they were or where they had come from or whose children they were. Those were questions for later, for when there was warmth and food and they had the resources to answer them. Right now, the only relevant information was that a 6-year-old had been carried down a mountain road in the snow and that the boy carrying her had not complained about it once. I took the girl from his back. She was light in a way that told me something. She did not resist. She simply transferred her grip from her brother's shoulders to mine with the exhausted trust of someone who had run out of fight. Inside, I put her in the chair closest to the fire. I added wood until the flames were high, and the room was warming fast. I got blankets, the heavy wool ones from the chest by the door, the ones I kept for the worst nights of winter, and wrapped all 3 of them without ceremony. The middle one stopped shivering after about 4 minutes. I watched for it. Hot water bottles, I told myself. Soup, bread. I moved to the kitchen. The soup had been on the back of the stove since morning, a habit I had maintained since childhood, my grandmother's habit before me. The understanding that a pot of something warm should always be available in a gray hollow winter because you never knew who would need it. Today it was a thick vegetable broth with barley and a handful of dried herbs from the bundles that hung above the window. I ladled it into 3 bowls without tasting it. I cut bread, the loaf that had come out of the oven an hour ago, and put it on a board between them. Warm milk with honey for the girl. She looked like she needed the sweetness. I brought it all to the front room and set it on the low table by the fire and crouched beside them. "Eat," I said. "Don't rush. There's more." The girl, she had not spoken yet, reached for the milk with both hands and held the cup against her chest for a moment before she drank it, like she was warming herself from the outside in. Then she put her face into the soup with the complete single-minded focus of someone whose body had taken over from their manners. The middle boy, who would tell me his name was Brian, approximately 7 minutes later because Brian was constitutionally unable to withhold information for longer than that, ate with his eyes closed. I noted this without comment. You only ate with your eyes closed when eating required your full concentration, when it was not casual but necessary. The eldest ate carefully, controlled bites. He was watching me between them with the assessment that had been running since the gate. When the bowl was half empty, he put down his spoon and said, "Thank you." And then, very quietly, as if he had been holding it, "I'm sorry. We didn't know where else to go." I looked at him. There was a 10-year-old sitting in my front room wrapped in a wool blanket who had just apologized for asking for help, who had walked his siblings down a mountain road in inadequate shoes in a gray hollow winter and arrived at a stranger's gate and said, "I'm looking for help," with the careful prepared steadiness of someone who had rehearsed the Franger's sentence because they needed it to come out right. I said, "You never apologize for that. Not here. Not for needing something." He looked at me. Something in his face, the managed dignity, shifted. "Not broke. Just shifted. The way ice shifts before it cracks, the slow acknowledgement of a weight being set down. "My name is Xander," he said. "Reggie," I said. "You're safe here." He picked up his spoon. After they had eaten all 3 bowls, all the bread, Brian accepting a second bowl with the directness of someone who had decided I meant it when I said there was more, I asked Xander once, "Is there someone I should call?" He reached into his coat and gave me a card, heavy stock, city address, a name, Voss, Capital Group, PA, contact number on the back. I called the number. It rang to voicemail, a professional message, a PA's name, a city area code. I left a message that was factual and calm. 3 children, Voss family, at my address in Gray Hollow, safe, being cared for. Call when you receive this. I put the card on the kitchen windowsill and went back to the front room. Brian had fallen asleep in the chair by the fire with his boots still on, which I removed without waking him. Lily was in the same chair as before, the blanket pulled to her chin, watching the fire with the steady attention of a child who had decided that fire was the most interesting thing available and intended to watch it properly. Xander was standing at the window, looking at the mountain road. "How long?" I said quietly. He turned. He had the expression of someone deciding how accurate to be. 3 days, he said. I looked at the road, at the snow coming down outside. "The pantry?" I said. He nodded. I said, "You did well, getting them here." He looked at the window. "I didn't know what else to do," he said. And I didn't want to, his jaw moved. I knew my dad was at the summit, the big one. He prepares for months. I didn't want to. "You didn't want to interrupt it," I said. He looked at me. Yes. I thought about what it took for a 10-year-old to make that calculation, to decide that his father's summit was important enough to not interrupt, even when the pantry was empty and his sister's legs had given out on the mountain road. I said, "Your dad would want to know." Xander looked at the fire. "I know," he said, "but I didn't know how to." "I'll find him," I said. "That's not your job anymore." He stood at the window for another moment. Then he went and sat beside his sister, and they watched the fire together, in the particular silence of children who had been through something and did not yet have words for it. And I went to the kitchen to find a way to reach a man named Lamont Voss at an international summit. The storm came in that night. Not unexpected, the gray sky had been building to it all day, and I had stocked accordingly, the woodpile full, the larder restocked from the town market 2 days prior. But it sealed the road up the mountain completely, which meant the Voss property was unreachable, and it was enough on the town road that I was not taking the truck out before morning. I put the children in the 2 guest rooms, Lily and Brian together in the larger one with the quilt that had been my grandmother's and the window that faced the mountain. Xander in the smaller room at the end of the hall with strict instructions that nothing required managing tonight and that if he woke in the night and heard me in the kitchen, I was just checking the fire. He said, "You don't have to tell me that." I said, "I know. I'm telling you anyway." He looked at me for a moment. Then he went into his room. I stayed up later than usual, tending the fire, listening to the storm move through the mountains, doing the calculation of food and warmth and duration. The larder was stocked for a week, easily, more if I stretched it. The firewood was sufficient. The cabin was warm. I had tried Lamont Voss's PA twice more and reached voicemail both times. I had found an email address through the company website and sent a message. I had done what I could. I sat by the fire and thought about 3 children who had managed 3 days on crackers and tinned goods and had not called anyone, and I felt the specific fury that lived at the intersection of wrong and preventable, the fury you felt when something should not have happened and did. Then I let it go, because fury was not useful at midnight with the storm outside, and I went to bed. In the morning, all 3 of them were in the kitchen. Not eating yet, waiting. Brian was at the table with the patient energy of a dog who knows breakfast is coming and is performing calm about it. Lily was at the window looking at the snow-covered garden. Xander was standing near the doorway in the position of someone who had been about to do something useful and was reconsidering whether doing something useful was allowed. "It's allowed," I said. "You can lay the table if you want." He found the cutlery drawer on the second try and laid 3 places with the precision of someone who had been taught how to do this and took it seriously. I made eggs and toast and the thick oat porridge I made every winter morning. And I put it all on the table and sat down with them, and we ate. Brian put honey on everything. This was not asked about or criticized. Lily ate her porridge in careful spoonfuls, watching me the way she had watched the fire the night before with the focused attention of someone building a picture. Xander ate steadily and asked, about halfway through, whether the storm was going to last. A day, maybe two, I said. The roads will be passable after that. He nodded. Then, what do you do? Here, I mean, when there's no storm. I run the guest house, I said. 3 letting rooms, meals included. Is it full? Not in winter, I said. The season doesn't really start until spring. He processed this. So, it's just you. Mostly, I said. The town keeps me occupied. He looked around the kitchen, the hanging herbs, the bread already proving for tomorrow on the counter, the copper pot that had been my grandmother's and that I used for everything. You were prepared, he said. For us. The larder and the blankets and... I'm prepared for winter, I said. You were part of winter. That's all. Something in his face softened. They settled into the cabin the way water settled into the shape of a vessel gradually, finding the corners and the crevices, filling the spaces. Brian settled first, which surprised no one. By the afternoon of the first full day, he had found the sled in the shed and had brought it to me with the air of someone presenting evidence in a legal case and said, "This is a sled." I said, "It is." He said, "Can we use it?" I said, "After lunch." He had soup in approximately 6 minutes, which I noted as a record, and then we went outside to the hill at the back of the property that had been the best sledding hill in Gray Hollow for at least 3 generations. He screamed on the way down the first time. Not fear pure velocity, the specific joy of a body moving faster than it expected. He came back up the hill with snow in every possible location and his face entirely transformed, the managed watchfulness of the past days gone, replaced by the face of an 8-year-old who had just found the best sledding hill in the mountains and intended to use it until his legs gave out. Lily watched from the porch the first time, wrapped in the quilt, her pencil already moving on a paper napkin I had given her when I noticed her hands looking for something to do. She drew Brian on the sled. She drew the hill. She drew the snow. She handed me the drawing without comment when she was done. I put it on the windowsill beside the PA's card. Xander came on the 3rd run. I did not invite him. I simply did not uninvite him, which I had found was the correct approach. He stood at the top of the hill for a moment with the expression of someone doing a risk assessment, and then he sat on the sled and went down, and the risk assessment fell off his face somewhere on the way, replaced by something younger and less guarded, and at the bottom he sat in the snow for a moment, looking surprised. He came back up the hill. "Good?" I said. He looked at the hill. "Yeah," he said. "Good." They sledded until the light went and came inside, red-cheeked and snow-covered and hungry, in the simple, satisfying way of people who had spent their energy on something legitimate. I made hot chocolate, real chocolate, the block kind, grated into warm milk with a pinch of cinnamon and put it in front of them, and the 3 of them wrapped their hands around the mugs and drank it with the reverence of people who had been cold and were now warm. Lily looked at me over the rim of her mug. She had not spoken directly to me, yet she spoke to Xander and occasionally to Brian, but her communications to me were conducted entirely through drawings and a series of clear and readable expressions. The current expression said, "This is very good." I said, "You can have more." She held out her mug. The scent of the cabin changed over those 3 days. I was aware of it the way you were aware of your own heartbeat, not constantly, but when you paid attention. The brown sugar and cedar that was my natural omega scent, embedded in the cabin's walls and furniture over years of living, was mixing with something else. The children's own scents, still developing, still more their lineage than themselves, something clean and sharp with an amber undertone that was not quite formed but was coming. Strong lineage. I knew enough about Omegaverse biology to read the undertone for what it was, the children of a powerful alpha, the bloodline present in them the way a river's source was present in its water. My nesting instinct, normally a background hum, the low frequency of an omega living alone in a domestic space, was doing something I had not experienced before. Not the romantic version, not the heat-adjacent version, nothing that required management or self-consciousness. Something older and simpler, The instinct that said times these small things need warmth, and I have warmth, and this is correct. The fire ran higher than I usually kept it. Extra blankets appeared in the rooms without my consciously deciding to put them there. I made richer things, the bread with more butter, the porridge with cream, the hot chocolate every evening because it was not necessary, but it was what they needed. My hands knew before my head did. Lily drew the cabin from every angle. The front, the side window, the kitchen seen through the back door. She drew the wood pile, she drew the copper pot. She drew me, always in motion, at the stove, at the wood pile, kneeling to check the fire. The figure in her drawings was never still. She slid them to me one by one, and I put them on the windowsill until the windowsill was full, and I moved them to the wall beside the fire. She watched me pin up each one with the focused satisfaction of someone who wanted their work properly placed. On the second evening, Xander sat at the kitchen table while I was making dinner and did not offer to help. He had moved past the performing usefulness stage and into something more comfortable and asked me how I chose what to cook. I said, I think about what the day needs. A cold day needs something heavy. A day when people are sad needs something sweet. He thought about this. What about today? I looked at him, at his face, which was more itself today than it had been at the gate, at the way he had asked the question, not performing maturity, just genuinely curious. Today needs both, I said. He watched me stir. After a while, he said, Our dad's gonna come. Yes, I said. Is he gonna be angry? Not at you. At the situation. I stirred the pot. I said, Probably at himself. Xander was quiet. Then, He's not bad at the dad part, he's just better at some things than others. I know, I said. People usually are. He looked at the pot. The important things, he said carefully. He's good at the important things. Like when Mom left, and everything was, he stopped. He was there. He didn't disappear. Some dads disappear when things get hard. No, I said. He just doesn't always know what to do with us, Xander said. Like we're a problem he knows is important but doesn't have the right tools for. I looked at him. I thought about a 10-year-old making that assessment with that accuracy, with that absence of bitterness in it, just a clear-eyed understanding of a person he loved. I said, He sounds like he's trying. Xander nodded. He's trying, he said. He just doesn't always know what trying looks like in a kitchen. I gave the soup a stir. He'll learn, I said. People do, when they have a reason. I reached Lamont Voss on the evening of the second day. The call was bad satellite connection, 4-second delays, the quality of a voice coming through from the other side of the world through equipment that was doing its best. But it was him. I knew it from the first word, the controlled voice of a man who had received my message and was now managing something very specific and not allowing it to show. He said, Are they safe? Completely, I said. Warm, eating, sleeping. They've been here 2 days. There was a storm. A pause, the satellite delay, or something else. He said, I'm ending the summit early. I'll be there tomorrow. I said, The road to your property is still closed, but you can come to me directly. I have the address. He said, I have it. He paused. Your name is Reggie Park. Yes. How did they find you? They walked down the mountain road, I said. They found my gate. Another pause. Then, very quietly, Xander walked them down. Yes. He didn't say anything for a moment. In the delay, I could hear something not sound, just the quality of a line that contained someone who was doing something very internal and very controlled. He said, I'll be there before dark tomorrow. I said, I'll have food on. He said, Thank you. He said it twice, once at the start of the sentence and once at the end, which suggested he felt the first one hadn't been sufficient. The call dropped. I put the phone down and went back to the front room where Brian had fallen asleep on the hearthrug with his hand on the dog that Grey Hollow did not own. The specific positioning of a child who had decided the rug was exactly the right place and that the imaginary dog was better company than the sofa. Lily was drawing by the lamp. She looked up when I came in. Your dad is coming tomorrow, I said. She looked at me for a moment, then she looked at her drawing, then she tore the corner off a clean napkin and gave it to me with a pencil. I looked at it. She wanted me to draw something. I thought about this. Then I drew a very simple house, 4 lines, a triangle roof, a chimney with smoke, and handed it back. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put it carefully in her coat pocket. The storm cleared overnight. I knew it before I opened my eyes. The quality of the silence changed when the wind stopped, the cabin sounds becoming themselves again instead of being layered under weather. By morning, the sky was the hard, bright blue of post-storm mountain days. The snow deep and clean, the air so clear that the peaks were visible all the way to the far ridge. The children were quieter that morning. Not unhappy, Brian still ate his porridge with honey. Lily still drew. Xander still asked a precise question about something he'd been thinking about, but there was a quality of waiting in them. The anticipation of a thing both wanted and uncertain. I made extra bread. I put the large pot on. I did not examine why I was making more than 3 people needed. He arrived in the early afternoon. I heard the car before I saw it wrong, tires for packed mountain snow, the engine working harder than it needed to, a city car driven by someone who had made up the distance on unfamiliar roads through will rather than knowledge. It came into view at the far end of the path and stopped. He sat in the car for a moment. I was at the window. I watched him through the glass. I did not have the prepared picture I thought I had. I had built something from the PA's business card and the company name and Xander's careful description. Controlled, powerful, better at some things than others. The man who got out of the car in my drive was all of those things, and also something I had not accounted for. He stood in the snow and he looked at the cabin for a long moment before he walked toward the door. In that moment, the moment before he put on the face he would put on, the competent, composed, father-arriving face, I could see what the past 4 days had actually cost him. It was in the set of his shoulders and the way his hands were and the specific quality of a person who had been holding something very tightly for a long time and was now within sight of what they'd been holding it for. Then his head came up. He walked toward the door. I stepped back from the window. His scent arrived before the knock dark amber and iron, the bass note I had been detecting in the children all week, arriving fully and at the source. And something in my chest did what it had been building toward for 4 days of warm soup and wool blankets and 3 small people sleeping safely in my guest rooms. The warmth went outward from my sternum and did not retreat. I went to the door. He was taller than I expected, controlled in the way of someone for whom control was not effort anymore but nature, dark eyes that went from my face to the cabin behind me and back, taking it in with the same fast, systematic attention that Xander used and that I now understood was not just Xander's habit, but Xander's inheritance. "Come in," I said. "They're in the kitchen." He crossed the threshold and I stepped aside, and the moment he was inside the cabin, the scent of it, 3 days of children and wood smoke and bread and my own omega warmth hit him, and he stopped. Not dramatically. Just a half-step pause. His jaw moved slightly. He was smelling his children in my home. His children, warm and safe and carrying my scent so thoroughly it was in every corner of the space. I said nothing. I let him have the moment. Then he walked to the kitchen doorway. Xander saw him first. He stood up from the table with the careful dignity that was Xander's natural state, and he walked to his father. And Lamont went down on one knee, and Xander let himself be held with the specific quality of a child who is very relieved and is not going to make it obvious. His hands gripped the back of his father's coat. Once, tightly, and then released. Brian did not perform dignity. He was across the room in 4 steps and attached at waist height, making no sound, just holding on. And Lamont's arm went around him and held him against his side. Lily held up her arms. Lamont lifted her. He stood with her against his chest, her arms around his neck, and he put his face into her hair and breathed. His eyes closed. I turned to the stove. The pot needed no attention. I gave it attention anyway, standing with my back to the room, giving the 3 of them and the man who had driven 4 hours on the wrong tires through mountain snow the privacy of this moment. After a while, Lamont's voice. "Thank you." He was at the kitchen doorway. The children had gone to the front room. I could hear Brian already explaining to Xander something that required considerable volume. He was looking at me. He was not in the kitchen, close, without the car and the driveway between us, what he had been at the door. The composure was present, but thinner. He looked like a man who had arrived somewhere important after a very long journey and was still recalibrating from the traveling. "Sit down," I said. "I'll get you something." He looked at the kitchen table, at the worn wood of it. at the 3 places still set from lunch. He sat down. I put a bowl in front of him. He looked at it. "You don't have to feed me," he said. I said, "I know." He picked up a spoon. We were quiet while he ate. In the front room, I could hear the children, Brian's voice carrying through the wall, something about the sled, Xander's response, Lily's silence that was not the empty silence it had been a week ago, but the fuller kind. Lamont said, "Xander walked them down." "Yes," I said. He said, "How far?" 2 kilometers, I said, "maybe a little more." He put the spoon down for a moment. "In the snow," he said. "Yes." He looked at the table. His jaw was tight. I said, "He made a decision about priorities, about what mattered enough to interrupt." He looked up. I said, "He decided the summit mattered more, that his job was to manage until you were available." Lamont's expression did something complicated. "He's 10, he said. "I know," I said. "That's the point I'm making." He looked at the bowl. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Tell me what you found when they arrived." "Exactly." I told him. All of it. Lily on Xander's back, Brian walking on feet he'd stopped feeling, the 3 days on crackers and tin goods, the apology Xander had offered for needing help. I told him the way I would want to be told, clearly, without softening, with the same calm I had used leaving the voicemail. He received it the same way. He did not flinch or defend or deflect. He listened with the focused attention of a man who had decided that this was information he needed to have correctly. When I was done, he said, "I'm sorry this fell to you." I said, "I told you don't be. I'm glad it fell to me." He looked at me. I said, "Someone who didn't know them might have handled it differently. Officially, your children needed feeding and warmth, not a report." He was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in the amber and iron of his scent, not dramatic, just a degree, something surfacing. He said, "Can we stay tonight, the road to the property?" "There's a room," I said. He looked at the table, then at me. I had said it before I decided to, which was not my usual way. I noted this without examining it and turned back to the stove. That night, after the children were asleep, we sat by the fire. It was not planned. We simply both ended up in the front room at the same time, in the way that happened in a small cabin with no designated separate spaces. I came to check the fire, he was already there, and neither of us left. He was sitting in the chair closest to the hearth with a cup of tea I had given him that he was holding without drinking, and he was looking at the wall where Lily's drawings were pinned. He looked at them for a long time. Then he said, "She hasn't drawn since her mother left." I sat in the chair on the other side of the fire. "How long?" I said. 18 months, he said. I looked at the drawings, the cabin from every angle, me in motion at the stove, 3 small figures on a sled. The wolf she had started drawing in the last day, careful triangular ears, small paws, a posture that suggested alertness without aggression. "She draws wolves," I said. "She always has," he said, "since she could hold a pencil." He looked at one of the drawings, but she stopped. "And now, she's..." He stopped. I let the silence be. After a while, he said, "What did you do to make her start again?" "I gave her paper," I said, "and I didn't ask about the drawings." He looked at me. "Some things restart on their own," I said. "They just need someone nearby who isn't expecting them to be something." He was quiet. Then, "She gave you one, the corner piece, from a napkin." I looked at the fire. "Yes," he said. "She's never given her drawings to anyone. She makes them and she keeps them." I said, "She gave me that one before she knew me." He said, "That's not how Lily works. She knows something before she knows it." He paused. "She's been like that since she was born." I thought about Lily at the window the first evening, watching the fire with the patient, absolute attention of someone building a picture from evidence. I thought about the way she had held up her arms to her father without hesitation the moment she saw him, not the reunion I would have expected from a 6-year-old who had been 3 days without adequate food, but something quieter and more certain than that. Outside, the snow had started again. Soft this time, not the storm kind, just the settling kind, the snow that came when the weather had nothing urgent to say. Lamont looked at the fire. He said, "I've been..." He stopped, started again. "The past 18 months have been the kind of hard where you're functional. You keep going. You're not collapsed, but you're not." "Present," I said. He looked at me. Yes. I said, Xander told me you didn't disappear, that some dads disappear when things get hard. He was quiet for a moment. I stayed, he said. But staying isn't the same as being in the kitchen, I said. He looked at me. I said, he used those words. He said, you're good at the important things, but you don't always know what trying looks like in a kitchen. Something moved across Lamont's face. Not pain exactly, the specific expression of a person hearing something accurate that they had been circling without being able to name. He said that. Yes. He looked at the fire. He's 10, he said again. But this time it sounded different. Not the helplessness of before. Something closer to wonder. I said, he's watching you the way Lily watches everything. Building a picture. He knows you're trying. He just needs you to know he knows. Lamont was quiet for a long time. Then, you're very good at this. I looked at the fire. I just pay attention, I said. People usually tell you what they need. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. He looked at me. The amber and iron of his scent was fully present in the cabin, now no longer contained in the way it had been when he walked in. The management relaxed in the way management relaxed when someone was tired and the fire was warm and they were past the point of performing. I was aware of it. I was being careful about being aware of it. I said, get some sleep. You've been driving. He looked at the fire for another moment. Then he stood. At the door to the hallway, he paused. He said, the children call you Reggie already. I said, that's my name. He looked back at me. His expression was the door opening a fraction. Just a fraction. He said, good night, Reggie. Good night, I said. He went down the hall. I sat by the fire for a while after listening to the settling snow and the quiet of the cabin, the four of them breathing somewhere in it, and the warmth in my chest that had arrived when he walked through the door and had not gone anywhere since. I said to the fire, well, there it is. The fire did not offer an opinion. I put it out and went to bed. The road closed again that night. I heard the weather report on the radio before bed, another system coming through, mountain roads advising against travel until clearance, which in Gray Hollow terms meant 2 days minimum. I turned off the radio and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then I went to the kitchen and checked the larder. More than sufficient. The firewood stack was full. The cabin was warm. In the morning, I told Lamont over breakfast. He received the information the way he received most information, without visible reaction, processing it internally, arriving at acceptance without the intermediate steps showing. He said, is there anything that needs doing? I said, the front path wants clearing, and there's firewood to bring in from the shed. He stood up. He was not immediately good at either task. The path clearing he managed adequately, he was systematic about it, working from the door outward in logical sections, which was correct in principle but slower than it needed to be. The firewood was more complicated. He stacked it wrong, too tight, not enough airflow, the way people stacked firewood when they had learned it from watching rather than doing. I restacked it without comment after he brought the second load in. He came back with the third load and looked at what I'd done. He said, different from how I had it. I said, yours would have been fine. Mine burns better. He looked at the stack. Then he put the next load down and watched me arrange it and arranged the one after that the same way. He did not ask why. He just did it. We worked the morning in the shed and the path and the areas around the cabin that needed attention after the storm, and the children came in and out Brian with persistent offers to help that were redirected toward carrying smaller things. Xander, who appeared when there was a specific task visible and completed it without being asked. Lily, who stood on the porch and watched the snow and drew in the small notebook I had given her on the second day. By midday, the cabin had the quality of a place where people were doing ordinary things, which was a different quality from crisis or emergency or waiting. It was the quality of a Tuesday unremarkable, functional, inhabited. I made lunch. Lamont set the table. He had watched where the cutlery lived the evening before, and I saw him go to the right drawer on the first try, and I noted this without comment. The afternoons were different from the mornings. In the mornings there was work, and work had its own structure. The afternoons, after lunch, had the slower texture of winter days in a mountain cabin, the fire, the light changing on the snow outside, the absence of urgency. Brian solved this by finding things to do with volume. He discovered that the acoustic properties of the front hallway were interesting and spent 40 minutes testing this hypothesis. He found a set of old playing cards in the drawer below the lamp table and declared that he was going to teach Lily a game, which Lily tolerated with the patient expression of someone who knew she would be better at the game than Brian within 20 minutes and was prepared to be gracious about it. Xander read. He had found the shelf of books in the smaller guest room practical books, field guides, a history of Grey Hollow that I had read 3 times, a well-worn copy of a mountain plant guide, and he was working through them with the focused application he brought to everything. He brought questions to me at intervals, the kind of questions that required actual answers rather than encouragement, which I found straightforwardly satisfying to provide. Lamont sat at the kitchen table in the afternoons and worked. He had his phone and a tablet and the serious, concentrated expression of a man managing a company from a mountain cabin, which was apparently achievable when the satellite connection was functioning. On the second afternoon, he looked up from his tablet and watched me working at the counter for a moment. He said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Why are you still here?" "In Grey Hollow. You could run a place like this anywhere." I looked at the counter, at the copper pot and the herbs and the window that faced the mountain. "This is my grandmother's cabin," I said. "She left it to me." I said, "I could have sold it, moved to the city, done something more." He waited. I said, "But the town needed someone who stayed, someone who was always here. And I liked being that person." He looked at me. I said, "Grey Hollow loses people to the city every year, the young ones especially. They leave, and the town gets smaller, and the people who are left get older, and there's less of what makes a place a place. I stayed because someone had to, and because it was my home, and because I'm better here than I would be anywhere else." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Xander is like that. He organizes things around people, makes sure everything is in order so other people don't have to." I said, "I know." He said, "He's 10. I said, "He learned it somewhere." Lamont looked at his tablet. He said, "His mother organized things. Before, she was very—" He stopped. I said, "You don't have to." He said, "I know." He paused. "I'm trying to understand something. About what you said last night. About being in the kitchen." I waited. He said, "I know how to protect things, provide for things, make things structurally sound so they don't fall over." He said it without defensiveness plainly, the way he said most things. "What I don't know is how to be in the room without a purpose, how to just be there, present without a function." I looked at him. He said, "Xander stops managing when you're around. You've done more in 3 days than I if he stopped." I said, "It's not a competition." "I know," he said. "That's not what I meant." I said, "What did you mean?" He looked at the window. He said, "I meant that watching you in this cabin has been clarifying." I said, "Clarifying how?" He said, "You make it look simple, not easy. I can see it's not easy, but simple, like the thing that's needed is just presence, attention." The fire kept high. I looked at the copper pot on the stove. I said, "It is simple. Not easy, but simple. You just have to decide that the being there is the point, not the strategy around the being there. Just being there." He looked at me. I said, "You drove 4 hours on the wrong tires through mountain snow." He said, "That's not." I said, "That's exactly it. You came. You were here before anything else. That's the simple version. Everything else is just practice." He was quiet. After a while, he said, "You're very direct." I said, "I grew up in a small town. We don't have enough people to waste time not saying things." Something in his expression shifted, the door a fraction wider. He said, "I appreciate it." I turned back to the counter. "Good," I said. The evenings had the particular quality of the evenings that happen when people have shared work and shared meals, and the day is done. Lily drew by the lamp after dinner. Brian played cards with a version of the rules that shifted in his favor at intervals, which Xander accepted with the weary patience of a sibling who had stopped challenging this years ago. Lamont sat with them and participated in Brian's card game with the focused application he brought to everything, which meant he was winning on pure strategy within 3 rounds, despite the shifting rules, and Brian's face was a masterpiece of recalibration. I made tea and sat in the chair by the fire and watched this happen. Lily slid a drawing across to me without looking up. It was the cabin from outside, the same angle she had drawn twice before, but tonight she had added something. 4 figures visible through the window. The same 4 she had been drawing, 3 small, 1 large, but tonight there was a 5th. I looked at it. She had drawn the wolf inside the cabin. I said, "The wolf is inside now." She looked at her next drawing. "Yes," she said. I said, "Why?" She said, "Because it stopped snowing." I looked at the drawing, at the wolf inside the warm window with the 4 figures. I put it on the wall with the others. Cole March's message arrived on the 3rd morning. I knew something had happened before Lamont showed it to me. He came to breakfast with the specific containment of a man who has processed something and packaged it and is now carrying the package carefully. He showed me his phone after the children had gone to the front room. I read the message. It was efficient and precise, a legal challenge to Lamont's fitness as a guardian, citing the incident. It named me. It named my guest house. It named the 3 days the children had spent under my care without documentation or authorized oversight. It noted that an Omega running a remote guest house who had been in possession of a CEO's children for 3 days without notification had created a situation requiring investigation. It was copied to a welfare authority and to a journalist. I handed the phone back. Lamont said, "He's been preparing this for months, waiting for something to use. The timing is, he's been following the Alderton acquisition. He wants me out of it." I said, "And I'm the pressure point." He said, "You shouldn't be. This isn't your problem." I looked at the window, at the snow outside, the mountain road, the path that Lamont had cleared yesterday in sections working outward from the door. I said, "Your children ate at my table for 3 days." He said, "Reggie." I said, "I'm not stepping back from that to protect myself from a legal inconvenience. I want you to know that before you try to manage it in a way that doesn't involve me." He was quiet. I said, "Don't build a structure around me without telling me. That's my one condition." He looked at me. I said, "Tell me what's happening and I'll handle my part of it. Don't manage it over my head." He said, "You sound like you've dealt with someone like that before." I said, "Everyone has." He held my gaze. He said, "The legal response is already in motion. My team has been building it since I understood what March was likely to do. Your care of the children during the 3 days is documented. My PA retrieved the voicemail message, the timestamps of your calls, the company card transactions. There's nothing legally actionable. What March is doing is noise designed to create press pressure." I said, "And the press?" He said, "I'll deal with the press." I said, "How?" He looked at me. He said, "By telling the truth, that my children were safe because of you. That your care was the reason this is a story about what went right rather than what went wrong." I looked at him. He said, "Is that acceptable?" I thought about it. Then, "Yes." He nodded. He said, "I'm sorry you're in it." I said, "I know. You said that when I called. It was the right thing to say then, and it's still the right thing." He looked at the window. After a while, he said, "I keep saying the wrong thing and then the right thing. In that order." I said, "You're getting faster at the right thing." He looked at me. The door a fraction wider. The road opened the morning after. We went down to town together, all 5 of us, because the children would not be separated from me with the cheerful, absolute certainty of children who have made a decision about where they belong, and Lamont had stopped pretending this was something to correct. The truck fit 5 with some negotiation about who sat where, which Brian treated as a genuine question of justice and Xander treated as logistics. Lily sat between me and Lamont in the front, with the settled quality of someone who had assessed the available options and selected the optimal one. Gray Hollow in winter was 300 people and 2 streets and the particular warmth of a place that knew itself well. I had been born here and had left once, for 3 years, for a city catering course and a job that paid well and felt wrong in the specific way of things that fit technically and not actually, and I had come back at 22 and opened the guest house and not left since. I knew everyone. Everyone knew me. The general store was the center of things in winter. Mara had run it for 40 years, and her store was the place that Gray Hollow gathered when gathering was needed, which, in a town of 300, was frequently. We had been there 20 minutes, Brian negotiating with Mara about the price of a particular chocolate bar he had identified as essential when Cole March walked in. He was not from here. Gray Hollow knew its people by scent and sound and the specific quality of a face that had been weathered by mountain winters, and March was a city man in a city coat with the smooth, unhurried manner of someone who had decided this was manageable. He was not alone. A legal representative, a young man with a briefcase, a journalist, a woman with a recorder she was not yet holding openly. March looked at me. He looked at Lamont beside me. He looked at the 3 children. He said pleasantly, "Mr. Park, I'd been hoping to find you." The general store had the quality it got sometimes when something was happening. Mara behind the counter had gone very still. The 2 farmers at the far end had turned around with the unhurried attention of people who had all the time in the world and intended to use it. March said, "I have some concerns I'd like to discuss regarding the welfare of these children during their recent unsupervised stay in your establishment." His voice was carrying. That was intentional. I said, "They weren't unsupervised. I was there." He said, "You're not a licensed guardian. You're not a registered carer. You're a guest house operator who had possession of 3 minors without authorization." Mara said from behind the counter, in the voice she used when she had heard something that required a response, "That boy has fed half this town through one crisis or another since he was 16. March looked at her. She looked back. She had been looking at things in Gray Hollow for 72 years, and she was not modified by the look of a man from the city. She said, "You're in the wrong place with that talk." March turned back to me. He said, "This isn't personal, Mr. Park, but an Omega in a remote location taking in a CEO's children creates questions that need answering." I said, "They were hungry. I fed them. That's the answer." He said, "The legal framework." Lamont said, "The legal framework is not your concern, Cole." His voice was the controlled voice, not cold, just very certain, the voice of a man who has been building a response for weeks and is now delivering it. March turned. Lamont said, "The documentation of Reggie's care of my children is complete. The timeline, the company card transactions, the voicemail messages, my PA's records. There is nothing actionable. What you have is noise, and noise requires an audience, and I'd encourage you to look around at the audience you have." The farmers at the far end of the store had been joined by 2 others who had apparently decided the general store was where they needed to be this morning. The doctor, who lived 2 doors down and whose door I could see from the window, was coming up the path. Mara's daughter had appeared from the back of the store. March looked at the room. He was reassessing. I could see it. The journalist had her recorder out now. She was looking at March, and then at the room, and then at Brian, who had turned to face March with the frank, direct gaze of an 8-year-old who had decided this man was the same kind of not nice as the man in the city and was not going to pretend otherwise. Brian said, "He fed us when we were starving. That's what happened. You could just say thank you and leave." The general store was very quiet. March said to Lamont, more quietly, "This isn't over." Lamont said, "I know. We'll finish it in the city. On the record." March looked at me one more time. He said, "Enjoy your sanctuary, Mr. Park. Remote locations don't stay hidden." He left. The journalist did not leave. She stayed, and she asked me questions, and I answered them plainly what I had found, what I had done, what 3 days in a warm cabin with enough food looked like. She asked Sander. He answered with the precise accuracy of a 10-year-old who had decided the truth was available and provided it. Brian told her about the hot chocolate. Lily did not speak to her, but she tore a drawing from her notebook and gave it to her, the cabin in the snow with the 4 figures visible through the window. The journalist looked at the drawing for a long time. The story that ran 2 days later was not the story March had wanted. It was the story of a mountain town Omega and a warm cabin and 3 children who had walked down a mountain road and found the right door. The welfare report was reviewed and closed. March's legal challenge was answered by Lamont's team with documentation that made the challenge look small. I read the story at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought, yes, that's accurate. And I set it aside and went to make breakfast. The day the road fully reopened, Lamont came and stood at the kitchen doorway. He said, "The property is clear. We should go up and—" He stopped. I was at the stove. I turned around. He was looking at the kitchen, at the table, the copper pot, the drawings on the wall, the windowsill where the PA's cards still sat beside the first drawing Lily had ever given me. He said, "The children don't want to leave." I said, "I know." He said, "Brian said this morning that he lives here now." I said, "Brian says a lot of things." He said, "Xander asked me if we could come back before spring." I looked at him. He said, "And Lily." He stopped. He reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. He set it on the counter and stepped back. I picked it up. It was a drawing. Lily's pencil, her careful lines, the cabin, the smoke, the mountain, the wolf on the porch. But she had drawn something I hadn't seen in the other drawings. A second wolf, smaller, sitting beside the first. I looked at him. He said, "She gave it to me this morning. She said the small wolf is learning from the big one." I held the drawing. He said, "I don't know how to do this slowly. I told you that the first night, and I'm telling you again because—" I said, "Lamont." He stopped. I said, "You've been at my kitchen table for 4 days. You stacked firewood wrong and then right. You set the table correctly on the second day because you paid attention to where things lived on the first. You stayed when the road closed, and you didn't make it into a difficulty." He looked at me. I said, "That's all slow is. Doing the next thing, and then the next one. You've been doing it." He said, "I don't know what I'm asking." I said, "Yes, you do." He was quiet. Then he said, "Can I come back? After the city. With the children, or without them, or I don't know the shape of it yet. But I don't want to leave this cabin and not come back to it." I looked at the drawing in my hand. The 2 wolves on the porch. I said, "I'll have the fire on." He crossed the kitchen. He stood in front of me and his hand came up to the side of my face, careful, certain, asking, and I did not move away. He said, "I'm going to say the right thing eventually." I said, "You've been saying it all week. You just haven't been hearing yourself." He looked at me for a moment. Then he kissed me. It was brief and real and had the quality of something that had been building for 4 days in a small, warm cabin and was now simply being what it was, without ceremony, without announcement. His hand warm against my face, the amber and iron of his scent, finally, completely present and not managed. He pulled back. He looked at me. I said, "Go get your children." He almost smiled the full version, the one I had been watching develop all week, the one that was Lamont without the composure overlay. He went to get his children. The leaving happened in stages. First the coats, which had to be found Brian's in the front room, Xander's on the hook by the door where he had put it correctly. Lily's, which had been placed by Lily somewhere that was logical to Lily and required a brief search. Then the bags, which had been brought down from the Voss property by someone from Lamont's security team the previous day. Then the small accumulations of 4 days a book Xander had been reading, the remaining cards from Brian's game, Lily's notebook. She stood at the kitchen table with it and looked at the wall of drawings, the full week of them, the cabin, the fire, the figures, the wolves, the 2 wolves. She tore out 3 pages and gave them to me. The first wolf, the first one she had drawn, the one from the napkin that had started everything. The border drawing she had done the day March came to the city lunch counter, but I realized, looking at it, that she had drawn it here too, her memory producing it again, the same protective line around the same scene. And the 2 wolves on the porch. She looked at me when she handed them over. Her eyes were her father's and her own and very serious. "I'll put them with the others," I said. She nodded. She went to find her coat. At the door, Brian hugged me with the absolute commitment of someone who has decided that this is how goodbyes work and is not going to be argued out of it. He said, "We're coming back before spring," Dad said. Xander offered his hand. I shook it the same careful dignity he had offered at the gate a week ago, but different now, less armored. The dignity of a child who had been somewhere safe and was leaving it rather than the dignity of a child who was not allowing himself to need things. He said, "Thank you for the market questions." I said, "Come back and ask more." He said, "I will." He went to the car. Lily was last. She stood at the door and looked at me with the patient, absolute attention she brought to things that mattered. She said, "The wolf stays." I said, "The wolf always stays." She seemed to find this satisfactory. She went to the car. Lamont was at the door. He said, "Next weekend." I looked at him. He said, "I'll come alone. If that's the children will be with their mother, I'll come alone." I said, "The East Room is free." He said, "I wasn't planning to use the East Room." I looked at him. He said, "I'm saying the right thing this time." I said, "Yes, you are." He stood on the porch for a moment, the snow around him, the mountain road, the morning light that had turned the peaks gold. He looked at all of it, at the cabin, at me, at the path he had cleared on the second day with the wrong technique that he had corrected before the third load. He said, "I used to think staying somewhere was a limitation." I said, "And now?" He said, "I think I misunderstood what staying meant." He stepped off the porch. He walked to the car and got in. The engine started, the car moved down the path and onto the mountain road and through the trees and was gone. I stood on the porch for a while after. The mountain was very quiet. The snow was deep and clean on either side of the road. Somewhere above the tree line, a bird was making the particular sound that mountain birds made after storms, not singing exactly, just present, just marking that it was there. I went back inside. I put the kettle on. I took Lily's 3 drawings and put them on the wall, the first wolf, the border scene, the 2 wolves, and stepped back and looked at all of it, the weekend drawings. The cabin known from every angle, the figures inside it in every configuration, the wolf moving from outside to inside to the porch with a companion. I put my hand flat against the wall for a moment. Then I went to change the guest room linens. The East Room could stay as it was. But the room at the end of the hall, the one where Xander had slept, the smallest room with the mountain view, I made up fresh, not because anyone was coming tonight, because it was the right room to keep ready. Spring came to Gray Hollow slowly and then all at once, the way it always did. The south-facing slopes showed green first, tentative, almost apologetic, small shoots finding their way through the last of the snow. Then the north slopes followed, and the mountain road dried out and became reliable, and the birds came back in numbers, and the town exhaled from the long-held breath of winter. The guest house had 3 rooms. 2 of them had been occupied most weekends since January. Lamont had come back the following weekend, alone, as he had said. He had used the East Room for approximately the amount of time it took to put his bag down, which Reggie had anticipated. What had developed over the weeks and months since was not dramatic in the way that some things were dramatic, not a declaration or a revelation, just the ongoing accumulation of a person fitting themselves into a life that already existed and finding that the fit was correct. He had learned the market. He came on Saturday mornings now and stood at the vegetable stands in his increasingly less city-appropriate coat and asked questions that had become good questions over 4 months of practice. He had a working knowledge of Mara's organizational logic, which was considerable, and a relationship with the doctor that had started formally and become genuinely warm. He had learned to be in the kitchen without a function. This had taken longer. It was harder than the market, harder than the firewood, harder than anything that had a clear, correct method. Being present without purpose required a different kind of discipline than the kind he was built for. But he practiced it the way he practiced everything, with focused application and the honesty to acknowledge when it wasn't working. He was better at it now than he had been. He sat at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings with his coffee and the mountain visible through the window, and he did not manage anything. He just sat. Reggie had noted this, and had not said anything about it, and had made better coffee on those mornings because some things deserved to be met with the right thing. The children came for a full week in early spring. The Voss property up the mountain had been renovated over the winter. Lamont had mentioned it once, practically, as an infrastructure decision, and was now a proper residence rather than a vacation house, with a kitchen that worked, and rooms that were warm, and a housekeeper from Gray Hollow whose name was Dot and who had known Reggie since he was born and whose reliability was not in question. But the children wanted to be at the cabin. Not all day, every day, they had their own place up the mountain now. And Xander had his ecological project to continue, and Brian had the sledding hill rivalry to manage, and those things required the mountain property. But they came to the cabin every morning, appearing at the gate at a reliable time, and they came for dinner every evening, and on the days when the weather was wrong for being outside, they were simply there, in the kitchen and the front room, and the particular way of children in a space that felt like theirs. Xander had 3 volumes of observations now. He was developing a theory about the snowmelt pattern on the eastern slope that he had asked Reggie to review for accuracy, which Reggie had done and found more sound than he expected, and which Xander had received with the satisfaction of someone who had expected no other outcome. Brian had won the sledding rivalry definitively and was now in a new phase involving lumber and the shed that Reggie was monitoring with careful attention and had not yet needed to intervene in. Lily drew. She drew everything, the spring coming, the slopes going green, the birds that Reggie could name for her when she asked. She drew the cabin and the guest house sign and the town and the general store with Mara at the counter. She drew Gray Hollow from the hill above it, tiny and specific and accurate. She always put the wolf in. On a Saturday morning in early spring, all 5 of them were in the kitchen. The light was different now, warmer, coming through at a lower angle, the mountain visible in the distance with the last of the snow on the peaks. The window was open for the first time since October, and the air that came in had the particular quality of spring air at altitude. Clean, slightly sharp, smelling of things coming back. Xander was at the table with his notebook. Brian was outside with his lumber project. Lily was drawing at the far end of the table. Lamont was at the kitchen table with his coffee and the morning quiet. Reggie was at the stove. Lamont said, "Stay." Reggie turned around. Lamont said, "Not for the weekend." He looked at the table, then up. "Stay. I know the guest house is here, and Gray Hollow is here, and everything you built is here." He paused. "I've been trying to figure out how to ask this correctly for 3 months." Reggie looked at him. Lamont said, "I don't mean leave. I mean let me stay here too, whatever that looks like. I'm not asking you to change anything. I'm asking if this is something I'm allowed to be part of, officially." Reggie set down the spoon. He said, "You've been part of it since January." Lamont said, "I know. I wanted to ask properly." Reggie looked at him. He thought about the wrong tired city car on the mountain road, and the firewood stacked and restacked, and the morning at the market, and the Sunday coffees with the mountain in the window. He thought about 4 months of a person arriving and fitting themselves into what was already there, not trying to build something different, just learning the shape of what existed and becoming part of it. He said, "I was already staying." Lamont looked at him. Reggie said, "The cabin is mine. The town is mine. You've been fitting yourself into all of it. I wasn't going anywhere." Lamont said, "I wanted to ask." Reggie said, "I know, and I'm glad you did." He reached across the table. Lamont put his hand in his. Xander looked up from his notebook. He looked at their hands. He looked at Reggie, and then at his father. Then he looked back at his notebook and wrote something. Reggie said, "What are you writing?" Xander said, "Observation log. I write down things that are significant." Reggie said, "Is this significant?" Xander said, "Yes." He continued writing. He said, without looking up, "I've been expecting this for 3 months." Lamont said, "Have you?" Xander said, "It was obvious." Brian appeared in the back doorway with sawdust in his hair. He looked at their joined hands. He said, "Finally." Then he went back to his lumber project. Lily slid her drawing across the table. The cabin, the smoke from the chimney, the mountain, the wolf on the porch, the second, smaller wolf. But she had drawn something new. Inside the window, the 4 figures, same as always, and on the porch, the 2 wolves, not watching anymore. Sitting together, turned toward the mountain, toward whatever was in front of them. Reggie picked up the drawing. He said, "They're not watching anymore." Lily said, "They don't need to watch anymore." He looked at her. She said, "They're home now. Wolves go home when they're done watching." He held the drawing and looked out the window at the mountain, at the spring coming in over the peaks, at the morning that was ordinary and entirely what it should be. He put the drawing in the center of the wall, where there was space, where it could be seen. Some things were worth watching over. Some things, when enough time had passed and enough care had been taken, became the thing you came back to not because you had nowhere else to go, but because this was the place that had been waiting, patient and warm and lit from inside. The kettle boiled. Reggie made tea. Outside, the mountain held the morning light, and in the cabin on its eastern edge, the fire was on, and the wolf was home.